Welcome, everyone. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's session, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. Welcome again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday special rebroadcast webinar, Filling Gaps ASAP, Unlocking the Potential of Substitute Teaching. Because this is a rebroadcast, there will be no live presenters, but we encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat box, where we will be sharing links throughout the session. All of these links will be forwarded to all registrants in a follow-up email. And additionally, we do invite you again to follow along with the conversation on Twitter using hashtag Learning Tuesdays and to tag us @ReadingByThird.
Today, we're going to explore one of those questions that is both universal and too often overlooked: substitute teaching. Now, I feel quite sure that all of us who are here today have memories of experiencing substitute teachers. And those memories, I'm going to guess, are not great. Here's what I remember: some really bad, pitiful, really, substitute teachers, some really pitiful student behavior, present company not excluded. And what I don't remember is a lot of really constructive learning going on, except maybe honing the skill of spotting vulnerable substitutes and honing our misbehavior skills. It wasn't great for students. It wasn't great for learning. And now that I think about it a little bit, it can't have been very good for those substitute teachers either. In recent days, we've started to see more coverage of the challenges associated with finding and deploying high quality substitute teachers. And as is the case with so many of the issues that we explore through these sessions, the pandemic has made the questions associated with substitute teachers all the more brought to the fore, right? And if we are really to create the kind of equitable learning environments and conditions for every child that is at the heart of the work of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, we've got to figure out how to tackle this challenge. It's going to be essential. So that's what we're all about today. We also know, by the way, and we'll get more details on this, that the challenges associated with substitute teaching, finding and deploying high quality substitute teachers, fall, like so many other things, more heavily on those kids about whom we are most concerned. So we're lucky to have a terrific crew of guests joining us today. People who've done a deep dive on the size and nature of the challenge and can help us describe that. People who are policy experts and thought about what the response might be, and people who are tackling and sometimes actually solving this challenge on the ground every day. As always in these webinars, we hope that this session will expand our understanding of a key issue related to early school success, and will produce some practical insights and ideas for actions that people can take. We're eager to get and incorporate your questions, as Sierra mentioned. So please post your questions at any point in this conversation, and we will work to make sure that they get answered. Now, before we get into it, let me quickly introduce our guests for today, and then we're going to get into this. Jill Violet and Amanda von Moos are the founders of Substantial Classrooms and the authors of a book called Substantial Classrooms. Jill and Amanda have been at the forefront of raising this issue about substitute teaching and at the forefront of creating creative ideas about new ways to tackle an age-old challenge with a special eye towards creating equitable learning opportunities. We'll hear from Jill and Amanda first, and then our friend Jeremy Anderson, who heads up the Education Commission of the States, will join us. Education Commission of the States is a nonpartisan national policy organization that serves as a partner to state policymakers across the board. Jeremy is going to focus today on observations and insights about the question of teacher shortages more broadly, and specifically substitutes, and talk about state level response to those challenges. Then we're fortunate, we're going to have three awesome practitioners who are on the front lines and whose experiences and ideas may give you ideas that you can consider for your communities. Cheryl Cotton is now the Deputy Superintendent of Instruction, Measurement and Administration at the California Department of Education. Before that, Cheryl's been an HR leader, a teacher, a principal, and a leadership coach specifically focused on equity. Jay Midwood, who you see on screen, is the Chief of Human Capital for the Central Falls School District in Central Falls, Rhode Island. Jay's work was featured in a recent piece in Education Week, which no doubt will be posted in the course of this conversation. And he's been a leading voice of organizational change and student-driven learning, including practice and policy at the state, regional, and national level. He's the co-author of a book. It was a big author day here. He's a co-author of a book called They're Not Stupid: Unleashing the Genius of Every Student. And then Marquise Taylor is the co-founder and CEO of Coaching for Change, a program that partners with colleges and public schools to provide academic support and mentorship for children's grades 4 through 12, while helping colleges develop a diverse teacher pipeline. He's one of the world's best emerging social entrepreneurs and was also named a social innovator by the Social Innovation Forum. With that, let's dive in, starting with Jill and Amanda. So Jill and Amanda, can you join us on screen now? And let's get rid of these slides and so we can actually see Jill and Amanda.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for joining today. Jill, I'm going to start with you. Just at the sort of broadest level, how did you get interested in, captivated with this issue of substitute teachers?
Right, because it's so sexy. It just pulls at you, right? No, I was having this experience. I'm the founder of a national nonprofit called PlayWorks that focuses on bringing out the best in kids through play. And so operating nationally with coaches in schools, really focused on recess. And I kept having this recurring experience all across the country where at some moment during a school visit, a principal would pull me aside and in a moment of quiet desperation would beg me to let them have their coach serve as a sub. And she or he would describe how they had a hard time getting subs or keeping subs, and how they were farming the kids out in those classes where they didn't have coverage to other teachers. And then they'd say something to the effect of, and your person has such incredible rapport with their kids, like they could really just, if they please, they would sort of beg. And I was always like, no, that's really that's not their job. But it happened so many times that I finally felt compelled to dig in.
Interesting. And in your digging in, a sort of a general observation of where the energy is and what your feedback has been.
Yeah, well, I want to turn it over to Amanda to really tell more about Substantial, which is the organization we co-founded, and to kind of give you a state of the state. But I would say that we've been working on this issue. Like Amanda's been working on it for a long time, but for the last 5 years, it has been a primary focus, and we've been digging deep. And I think one of the things that often surprises people when we talk about it is that we've uncovered quite a number of bright spots. And so I think in terms of the context for this conversation today, the two sort of salient points about those bright spots that I wanted to call out were, one, the folks who we've seen who've been really successful in tackling this issue, they haven't just been focused on the sort of very narrow problem at hand. They've taken a much larger perspective where, in conjunction with addressing this sort of substitute teaching coverage question and challenge, they also were bringing to bear efforts to solve the challenges of teacher pipeline and student outcomes of all sorts of different stripes, and teacher retention more generally. Like, how do you make it feel better in schools? And then the second observation is that the pandemic has undoubtedly exacerbated this issue, and it's also laid bare the inequities that already existed. And so in that way, I think substitute teaching is sort of a universal sort of educational challenge. But I'd say that when, again, you look at the folks who've had the most success in solving this challenge now and in past, that they've not just sort of retreated to their office and made some decisions, but they've really created sort of opportunities for partners to come together to co-create solutions, often sort of unlikely allies in addressing this challenge. And they've brought a real mindset of experimentation to bear in addressing the issue. And I call that out because, like, it's hard to miss what's going on in the world and the media coverage of this topic in particular, and not feel like the house is on fire. I just need somebody with a pulse in the room right now. And we're not saying you have to totally rebuild the house, but I think the focus on just short-term solutions without being willing to do even just some medium-term efforts, it's just going to perpetuate this cycle of dysfunction.
It's really interesting. So let's put a pin in that and come back to it when we're talking to our experts on the ground, because I think one of the tension points is, I mean, it's this sort of urgency, immediacy problem. Like, you need somebody in the second grade classroom right now.
Right.
And as opposed to that, like, that's not a good way to, quote unquote, solve the problem, but who's got a time to solve the problem when there's this immediate challenge? So when we have Jay and Cheryl with us, I really want to come back to that. But Amanda, let's turn to you and give us a little, can you give us a snapshot of what substantial is, but also what this problem looks like, what it feels like, and the size and scope of this challenge?
Yes, thank you for having us. And I'm really excited to talk about it. So Substantial is a national nonprofit. Our mission is to unlock the potential of substitute teaching. We do that by partnering with schools and districts. And then we also do that by looking for and helping to spark innovation in this field, in how we think about what happens when a teacher needs to be away from their classroom. So we can go forward. I'm used to having my own slides, advancing my own slides. So this is, I think, a sort of highest level snapshot of what we see happening right now. This will feel familiar to most people. And that is, we have teachers are really tired coming out of the pandemic. And although it's uneven, as I think Jeremy is going to help us understand better, we are seeing people struggling with having enough teachers this fall. And then we also see sort of the world that we look at, which is the substitute teacher world. So if you imagine, we have kind of a pipeline of folks coming in, and they're going into the classroom ready to help, ready to support and fill in those gaps. We're seeing a real decline in people in that pipeline or pool. And we've just highlighted a couple of these if you're a visual thinker. So people are feeling alone. It's a very hot labor market. And people are feeling unprepared. It's a very hard assignment to go into a classroom. And that's especially hard right now as we come out of this sort of collective trauma that we've all had. So if we move forward. So pre-pandemic, that on average, US students will spend a full year with substitute teachers by the time they graduate high school. So when we talk to leaders about this, I think substitute teaching ends up often feeling like the elephant in the room. It's something that's sort of invisible in the experience that students have in school. But when you really step back, a full year is a very significant part of education. And these days can be quite memorable for students. One thing that I think has really stuck with me over the years is a principal describing to me that when she has a lot of students who've experienced trauma in their lives, substitute teaching, the way we structured substitute teaching right now, it's sort of uniquely bad for that. So we put, their trusted adult in school is not there. And a stranger comes into the classroom who might not have any relationship with them. And for a kid with trauma, like that makes for a harder day. And I think contextually right now, we're all sort of in this moment of processing trauma collectively. So moving on. So just to give a little more on the scope, the size and scope. So pre-pandemic, we saw about 600,000 working substitute teachers. Back of the envelope, we think it's about 250,000 classrooms that need subs every single day. Pre-pandemic, we saw about 80% of those jobs filled and 20% unfilled. So even before the pandemic happened, we were really seeing a struggle to get enough subs so that teachers can take time off when they need to or go to do other professional duties. Today, we don't have data nationally yet, but what we're hearing anecdotally and what's in sort of papers where people describe their fill rates, we think we have about 50 to 60% of substitute requests filled nationally. And that means about 40 to 50% of those are unstaffed. So
Amanda, what happens when like that unfilled thing, that seems bad. Can you describe what happens in a school and what happens to young people when this is the case?
Yeah, Sierra, if you don't mind just moving forward 3 slides, I've got a slide on that. We worked with an illustrator for writing the book, and I love one more. And I just love her illustrations. This is one of my very favorites. So this is what happens. So the short answer is it falls on other teachers. And at the moment, it's falling on other teachers, coaches, anybody in the building or in central office who can come and fill in that class. So if it happens in elementary schools, it's 6.5 hours. It's a long time to fill. And in elementary schools, if it happens infrequently, sometimes you have a coach or somebody else who steps in if it's again infrequent. As it starts to become more frequent that you have many classrooms without staffing, the kids get divided into other classrooms. So what that means from the kid perspective, I get a packet of work, and if I'm a 5th grader, I might go sit in the back of a 1st grade class. And what that means is that is making a more complex day for that 1st grade teacher. It is distracting all the rest of those 1st grade students. And for that 5th grader, they've really got a packet of work that if we're all honest, like nobody's checking. No, like it's busy work. So that's what happens usually. And then in high school, you see a lot more people covering on prep periods. Yeah, and I think Jill told her reason why she started working on substitute teaching. I started working on it because I'm a principal coach, and I would spend a lot of time in schools that had that 50 to 60% coverage. And what I would see is that it creates this morning chaos that makes it really hard to run a school. It also makes it really hard as a sort of a principal coach. You're there to try to get people to work on things that really impact learning, right? And change the trajectory of what's happening in that school, almost always. And the fact is, if they don't have enough staffing, if they can't rely on being able to support their teachers in this way, and every day they're trying to farm out students and negotiate that with their teachers, nothing else strategic is happening. Like it's really very, very difficult. And so we're now experiencing that nationally. That thing that used to happen only in some schools now is happening basically everywhere. So going backwards.
Yeah, go back. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, please. I did, in case people aren't familiar, I did want to just describe a little bit about how substitute teaching works. So substitute teaching is like the original gig economy. So the way it works is somebody would apply to be a sub, they become part of a centralized pool of subs in a district, in a place, a district or with the staffing agency. And then they get access to a list of who needs subs on that day, and they self-select which school they're going to go to. What we see is that there's this enormous variety of people for whom that is an attractive job. So we often see lots of retired teachers, working artists, people who are aspiring teachers, people who want to check out education as a possible career, people who are just interested in helping and being part of kids' education. So huge variety. Right now, what we're seeing is we don't have as many of those people as we need, and that's partially because of safety concerns. This is pretty high exposure. You are moving classroom to classroom. We're also seeing that pay and benefits aren't competitive as the economy kind of heats up specifically for these kind of workers, where education's not as nimble. So it's hard, especially on the benefit side. And then we also see many people who might have been subbing historically are being pulled into full-time assignments, either because there's vacancies or because we've created more jobs. There's a big need for tutors right now. And so we're going after the same kinds of people and putting them into other kinds of roles. Moving to the next slide. And then the other thing we're seeing is in the fall specifically this year, we saw the need for subs increasing. So normally at the beginning of the school year, it's our lowest time because teachers, we don't really have PD going. We, we're pre-flu season. Usually the start of the year, we don't need a lot of subs. That's not true this year. We started the year with a real gap between how many we needed and how many we had. So part of that is people are tired. A lot of that is the requirement that you need to quarantine. Then the long-term jobs is really about vacancies and health things. And then, as I said, that increase in tutoring. So just one more. And then we talked about this already, but the impact of uneven coverage is very significant. And it's something that I think is a little under the radar right now. And I would say, again, as principal coach, I'm working on this because I know how important it is if you're trying to run school. And it's a thing that often we don't prioritize at the district level, but if we listen to principals, this is one of the things that is the hardest part of their day. Okay.
Amanda, let me ask you this. One of the biggest focus areas for the campaign for grade level reading is obviously to try to create equitable learning opportunities for every child. And as we emerge from this pandemic, we hope to accelerate learning opportunities for those who were hardest hit in terms of their learning opportunities or access to learning during the pandemic. If you put an equity lens or a slice on this question of principles, what do you come away with? And Jill, if you want to weigh in on that as well, obviously.
I'm thinking about subs or thinking about the burden on principals?
Thinking about substitutes. Yeah. Like if our focus is accelerating learning opportunities for young people who are most at risk for being left behind. And is this substitute challenge more profound in the areas where those kids are more likely to be?
Yeah, so I think it is. And for me, I have kind of two takeaways. One is really the urgency of making sure subs are prepared to step into the classroom. Mm-hmm. So it's very basic, but right now we don't train subs almost at all. So I think preparing people to step in the classroom is the most urgent and sort of time sensitive. And then the second thing is, I think, as I described, like we have set up substitute teaching as a gig economy model that really is based on individual choice. And those individual choices are very much impacted by systemic inequality. So people are making individual choices, but I think that they're responding to the structure and conditions that are true in our schools. So I think that one way that we need to, I think it's time to revisit the gig economy structure, and that we need to create subs who are assigned to individual schools. And I think it's actually probably maybe we need to move away from calling it a substitute teacher at all.
Interesting.
And I think I'm so excited for you guys to hear from Jay, because I think he is one of the people who really got me convinced that this could work. This idea of full-time. And awesome. And I'll just say, otherwise it just falls on the principal, which is not, it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
And the students who need the most stability get the least. And I think that needs to drive how we think about redesign and the urgency around it.
Jeremy, I'm gonna call on you in 1 second. So if you would put on your camera, that'd be great. Jill, while Jeremy joins us, I wondered if you had any special thoughts on this question of equity.
Yeah, well, I just think sort of building on what Amanda's saying, and again, the context I said at the outset, right? That this is a moment in which, as we revisit or look at how to redesign the substitute teaching experience, we could be intentionally building it as a role to address equity issues. And if we stopped being quite so trapped by how we've always done it and thought, moving forward, given that we're spending this money on humans who are coming into these schools and not doing it particularly well, how might we actually reimagine this role so that it was actually designed to achieve the outcomes we seek, like paying attention to the kids who are disproportionately impacted by our economic and racial inequities.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really agree. And when I think about this notion that 1 day out of 10 may be spent with a substitute, or 1 year out of 13, and then we think about how precious that school time may be for young people who depend on school as an opportunity to learn. That to me becomes really, really profound. And if then we think about all the things that kids in that situation bring to school and the challenges, and then here we're putting people who are, sort of drive-by gig economy people in front of those kids. We're giving, as I said in the opening, everybody's getting a bad experience. It's no good for the kids. It's no good for the substitute teachers. We need to, I think you've identified something really important here.
I do want to interject one thing though, because and you said it at the outside when you were remembering that you had some bad sub experiences. A huge number of our current educators, our educational leaders, our leaders in union leaders you have heard of, all sorts of humans have started their careers as subs. And so there are some amazing, brilliant subs out there, despite the fact that we treat them terribly, don't have a manager for them, and kick them as they're walking out the door. So I just fair point.
Okay. Fair point.
Thank you,
well
Jill.
Said. Well said.
Could go to the next.
Jeremy, so Jill and Amanda, don't go far. And Jeremy, let's talk about this issue of teacher shortages in general, and then specifically this particular kind of teacher challenge and what's happening at the state level. Can you start out by giving us a general picture? And thanks as always for joining us. You are one of the most valuable players in the campaign for grade level reading world.
Well, glad to be back, John, and happy to give you kind of a perspective. I want to start off with the next slide, just talking a little bit about the teacher recruitment and retention first, because this plays into why we need substitute teachers too. So on the next slide, I think we're hearing a lot of media right now about how we have this massive shortage of teachers. And the evidence that's out there really shows that what we have is a mismatch between supply and demand rather than a chronic shortage of teachers. And specifically where we're missing is some specific teacher positions: math, sciences, dual languages, special ed. That's not to say that there aren't shortages in certain areas, but the majority of those shortages that we see nationally are in those specific areas. And so there are some opportunities for states to do things a little differently. If you go to the next slide, one of those things that we see states doing is looking at a lot of data to figure out what are the levers that they can actually move on some of this. So looking at where are those shortage areas, and a lot of the state policy levers come around in what are financial incentives to get more people to look at those specific jobs, or what can they do to provide early and ongoing supports to help keep people who are interested in education in the field. I mean, there are shortages. I don't want to say there's not. I do want to admit that the pandemic has created a larger problem with this, but this is something that we were tracking 7 years ago, and it wasn't fixed by the time the pandemic began. So another thing on the next slide I want to just talk about is where things fit with some of the substitute teacher shortages.
Can I, Jeremy, can I ask you a quick question before you go forward? You talked about specific areas, substantive areas. Is this more of a challenge also in specific geographic areas? Are there harder places and places that actually have plenty of labor?
Yeah. There are. The problem for those specific areas on special ed and science and math and some of the dual languages, it's prevalent across the country. It is higher in rural communities, in some of those at-risk communities, in some communities where maybe teachers aren't as interested in going for safety reasons. And so you do see that in some geographic areas, but it is a problem that is seen nationally across the board. And so, I mean, if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we're really seeing is states struggling with how to do this. And so there are some state policies I want to highlight on how they're recruiting and how they're trying to retain substitute teachers, which are good starts. But a lot of this is at the district level. I mean, we had a news article that's linked there about one school in New York that didn't have enough substitutes. So they moved 11th and 12th grade in the school to remote, trying to assign all of the substitutes that they needed to the grades that were 10th grade and lower. And I think it's going to be a big challenge as we move forward for states to figure out what they're going to be able to do. States have done a lot in recruitment and retention, though, of teachers. And now we're seeing them apply that to some substitute teachers. We used to have 7 or 8 years ago that an average teacher who was starting out first year, their average life cycle of staying in the industry was about 3 years, and they were leaving to take a different job. Well, states have really done a good job on recruitment and retention to keep a lot of those teachers coming out of the teacher prep programs in the industry now. And they're using some policies to switch to similar ones on substitute teachers. So my next slide is, if we can go 2 more slides, it's really highlighting a couple of states. California has done some amazing work, and I'd love to tell you about all of it, but we are honored to have Cheryl Cotton with us, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Instruction for the California Department of Ed. So I'm going to allow her to talk a little bit more about California. Great. But if we go to the next slide, examples of states that are changing some policies. We have Louisiana that actually changed policies last year to allow retired teachers to come back. In some states, you couldn't really go back and do too much substitute teaching or teach because it would affect your retirement. And so Louisiana is an example that changed policies that made it hard for retired teachers to come back. Next slide. When we look at Missouri, I think we might have gone 2 there. Or no, when we look at New Jersey, that's fine. When we look at New Jersey, they've actually changed some of the policies to allow students, so people who do not have a college degree yet, but do have at least 30 semester credit hours and are 20 years old, to actually apply for substitute teacher credentials. And in Missouri, the next state that we have, they've actually changed policies just recently that actually allows for candidates to receive substitute teaching certificate by completing 20 hours of online training. Again, these are examples of policies we usually wouldn't have seen at the state level, but they're focused on trying to recruit additional teachers, especially for the substitute teacher positions.
Awesome. Jeremy, hang for there 1 second. Amanda, can you come back for a second? Because I know that you've been thinking a little bit about this state policy, which as Jeremy says, and we're going to bring Cheryl into this in just a minute. As Jeremy says, this is mostly something that happens at the local level, but state policy creates either flexibility or inflexibility that allows districts to respond in different ways. And I know you've been thinking a little bit about this and researching it. So go ahead and comment on what Jeremy's saying. And then Jeremy, I'm coming right back to you.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing kind of nationally at the state and district level is people are pulling 2 levers primarily. One is around pay, so big increases in pay in lots of places for substitute teachers, which is great. Gig economy model, we were as low as we could go, and pay increases do help. And then the second is decreasing education requirements, which also helps with getting in line with the labor market. And I think there's a big conversation right now around sort of thinking about why do we have minimum education requirements and who they exclude. in thinking about who is good at working with students, and what do we need substitute teachers to, what sort of skills and competencies. One challenge, I think, is I think that we would not, if we were thinking about teacher preparation, completing 20 hours of online training would not feel sufficient to any of us. And the reality is these substitute teachers, once they get into the classroom, they don't have a day-to-day manager. They don't have any ongoing support, coaching, training, all the things that new teachers get. So while I'm excited to see, for example, that opportunity for having a lower education requirement and doing this online training, I also think just paradigm-wise, we really need to think about one way to reduce the churn of people coming through substitute teaching is to prepare them to be successful in the classroom, to prepare them for what they're actually going to be doing. And then we know that teachers, we don't just do pre-service prep and then send them on their way to develop their teaching practice on their own independently. They have ongoing support, and they're part of a team, and we put all kinds of strategies in place to help them develop their practice. I think we need to be thinking about that for substitute teachers as well.
Jeremy, let me jump back to you. You sit in this spot where you see policy on a whole range of issues at the state level across all the states. And one of the things I know that you see is you see unintended consequences and ricochet effects. So as you, and I know that you've just got actually into this substitute thing and have learned a whole bunch from the conversations we've had leading up to this webinar. So when you think about all that, and then I'm curious what it makes you think about the possibilities for state action and the wisdom actually of state action and how it fits into a bigger picture of trying to respond to a real need here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions that come into play. So what I talked about on trying to recruit, a lot of people may say, well, you're watering down the standards for what a substitute teacher would need to be. We may be lowering the quality of education. There's just as many states, though, that have really looked at how do they actually put some evaluations on substitute teachers. Florida and Michigan have some new policies that are actually setting up an evaluation standard for substitute teachers. Like in Michigan, if you're a substitute teacher for more than 30 days and you have a rating that says you're effective or highly effective, then you actually could get your substitute teaching license extended for almost an entire year. So again, not just having a warm body, as you had said, John, but having someone who's in there, there's an evaluation process. This substitute teacher meets a highly effective or effective standard. So that's a good way to be looking at it. You go to the next slide also, Arizona actually looked at something which is actually allowing substitute teachers, and we're going to have some other speakers talking about this. Substitute teachers actually have the potential, if they've gotten an evaluation, to move into positions for full-time teaching. Yeah. And so it's an incentive there to try to fill not only teacher shortfalls, but to get the best of the substitute teachers into the teaching core, which has some real benefits. I also think, and Amanda's talked about this and Jill has, dollar sign matters. So the gig economy question is there too. And there are some districts, there's on my slides 4 or 5 districts that actually we know have increased their substitute teaching salaries so that they can have a higher quality. It's a balancing act. There are a lot of districts in the nation where a substitute teacher is paid more per day than what a contracted full-time teacher is. Yeah. And so you've just got to look at that. And I don't have a magic wand to say, here's all the money the districts need to make this work, but it is a balancing act to figure out how you can do that in the best possible way. It's a reality as we're coming into this post-pandemic economy that is going to have to be addressed, though.
Yeah, totally. Amanda, you wanted to respond to something that Jeremy said, and then Cheryl and Jay and Marquise, you're in the on deck circle. We're about to come to you and hear some of your experiences and observations, and then we'll be opening up to everybody. But go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, Jeremy, is it your interpretation that the Michigan one is for long-term subs, right? Subs who are filling into a vacancy and fully stepping into the role of a teacher?
Yeah, it is for long-term subs, but the way it's written is it allows you to have a substitute teaching license, I believe, for up to a year. So if you're effective or highly effective, you can get a license for longer than maybe you had before.
So you can be in that assignment longer. Yeah.
And this is probably more for long-term health issues that a teacher may have, a maternity or paternity leave or something like that.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks so much, Jeremy, and stand by both to comment on what others are saying and as a resource on this. Now I'm going to invite Cheryl and Jay and Marquise to join us so we can hear a little bit about their experiences and their observations. Thanks so much for joining us. Cheryl, you span the globe. You've been at every level of this. You experienced this as a principal, and now you're at the state level. So I'm really curious to hear your observations of this particular challenge, sort of at every level. You can work down from what Jeremy said, or up from your experience as a school leader.
I think I've really been tapping into my role as a school leader and a district leader. That's where it was getting really hairy. And this is pre-pandemic. With the pandemic, it's gotten even greater, as folks have already said. I think it's important stepping into figuring out how to address substitute teaching challenges within your own school or your district. First off, know your data. I think it's important, know your fill rates, identify your equity issues within your district, identify those hard to fill schools and try to figure out why. Find those bright spots, what's working. They're welcoming folks into the building as they come into the building. They are assigning them to consistent classrooms. They're working closely with the classroom teacher. It feels like not a gig job, not a gig, but a job, that they are part of the school community. It's also, finding out the percentage of the subs that you hire. What I found in the district that I worked in most recently is we were hiring probably 20% of our teaching force was coming from our subgroup every year. So that was a pipeline that we hadn't accessed, we hadn't tapped into, and we hadn't recognized. So making sure that you're aware of who you're bringing in and tracking that data. Value every adult that engages with your students. You value your teachers, you value your custodians, you value the bus driver. Everyone has a role to play with our students. Value our subs as well. Trying to be consistent. They're consistently seen at certain schools. The kids know them, the parents know them, the staff knows them. They're part of that community. And then you invest in what you value, right? Valuing your substitute teachers means that you are investing in professional development for them, that you are welcoming them into schools, that you are extending and having long-term positions available for them. Our greatest win in filling, in particularly in those hard to fill schools, were those schools that we said, okay, we are hiring this sub for the year to be at this school. That they are part of this community, they're part of the landscape. They know the kids, they know the teachers, they know the office staff, the administration, but they also, we're not scrambling every day to find someone to fill a classroom. We have someone that we know that we can draw on first. And that person, if they're not needed that day, they fill in other places. They're still engaging students. They're still engaging and supporting in classrooms. And then finally, tap into your community. Community members, they are vested in our community. They know our kids, they know our families. They look like our kids, they look like our families. That's the community that we want to be supporting our kids. And again, that also builds your teacher pipeline. That addresses diversifying your workforce as well. I'm throwing a bunch of stuff out there.
No,
but that's
when you can you get more specific on the value of your community? I think it really relates to what Jay and Marquise are gonna to talk about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just tell you that my younger daughter Lily had a long-term sub when she was in the second grade. It was a total disaster. The first one bombed out, the second one bombed out, the third one bombed out. And then Kate Sims' mom, Linda Sims, became the teacher for the rest of the year. And it was totally cool. So yes, to the community thing rang the bell for me, but I'm curious what you're referring to.
That was my experience as well in schools when I was principal. I had my cadre of go-to a couple of moms who either were working from home or they were in between positions. They were like, if you need us, yes, we'll go ahead and sign up to be a sub. Yes, I'm available on Thursdays. Those folks who are available and willing. Also tapping into those college students as well. I was at a parent meeting, our African-American parent group was meeting. And I had a grandmother come up to me and says, you know, my granddaughter just graduated from wherever and she needs a job. I said, well, send her to me. Let's talk. That connecting in those ways, in California, college students with 90 units can apply to be a substitute teacher. They can move forward in that way. They can dip their toe into the teaching workforce, decide if that's a career that they're interested in. But it gives folks access as well. But that's what I mean by valuing a community.
Fantastic. We're going to hear more about that from Marquise and Jay in just a second. I want to ask you one more question. A lot of what you talked about, Cheryl, sounds like the notion of having additional staff capacity that is flexible and can respond to your daily needs. But we know how complicated schools are and how stressed and stretched they feel. So yeah, sure. I mean, just like in all our organizations, it would be great to have some extra capacity to apply to things, but it's hard to do. I think there's the nugget of, a big answer there. And I know that Substantial is really interested in this, but I also think, wow, it's hard to do. Like how can districts and schools do that?
As Amanda and Jeremy have noted, these are not high paid positions. You can get a sub in there for less than $20,000 for the year in terms of impact to your budget. There are ways in which you can do that, that you can bring folks in. It's not an easy, quick fix, but again, you invest in what your needs are and you invest in what you value.
Well, I think, part of it is thinking about how important it is, not just how urgent it is day by day, but how important it is. And it's part of the point of doing this session today, is to underscore the importance of what's going on, the number of school days of real learning that kids are losing and so forth, and figuring out, hey, what can we do about that? Because it's too big an issue. So thanks for your comments on all that. Go ahead.
Just one last piece in terms of answering that question. Right now with the pandemic, we've got reopening schools across the nation. And schools opened for structure. We were seeking structure. We were seeking stability. And there have been a record number of dollars that have gone out to support around COVID. This is another way that you can use those funds to support the learning that's happening in your schools, to provide that consistency. So justifying the use of those funds to go towards maintaining a stable and consistent environment, I think is one way that you can go. And this is a rare opportunity that we have in education right now, where there is an abundance of funds to support student learning.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Cheryl. And stay with us, stay on screen, because I want you to be part of this. But now I'm going to turn to Jay and Marquise. Jay, you've been doing, you're on the district side, on the HR, trying to figure out clever solutions. Marquise, you've put together an interesting new kind of labor force for this. So Jay, let me start with you, and then I'm going to come back and Marquise have you talk about what you're doing and what you're seeing and learning from that. But Jay, tell us a little bit about the story in Central Falls. And again, I want to remind people that this was featured in the Ed Week story. So check that out, which is posted again in the chat. Jay?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, John. So our story actually started 5 years ago. So even before it was a crisis, I think, where we are nationally. In Central Falls, we're 1 square mile school district. We have about 20,000 people living in 1 square mile. So it's one of the densest environments in the country, if not the most. And for us, it was, how do we address the traditional role of the substitute teacher? So this was 5 years ago. We knew the traditional role wasn't working for us. So what we envisioned was a few things, and Cheryl, talked about this, and Jeremy, touched on it as well. We had sort of 4 key areas that we wanted to address. So first and foremost was, how do we create an internal teacher pipeline. How do we create that pipeline, which is sort of the bullpen, the AAA affiliate to the Boston Red Sox here in New England?
Whatever about that. Whatever about your Red Sox.
But at any given point, if we have an opening, it would be great to have that bullpen ready to go to make the transition. The second was, how do we create a clinical experience for those who maybe don't have the teaching certification or don't have an undergrad in education, but have always wanted to get into public education, agents of social change, or those from the community, to Cheryl's point about how do we open the door to allow them to be active members of learning and teaching. The third piece is exactly that, community. We have so much genius in the city of Central Falls, genius, and we are a Latinx community. We have individuals who are bi and trilingual. These are the people that we want to we want to invest in, and we want to give them the opportunity to be instructional leaders. And then the fourth piece was support in the schools. How do we ensure that high quality instruction continues in the absence of the classroom teacher? So that was the premise. Those were the four ideas that we had, and it started literally on a napkin from the Detroit airport. My former superintendent, Victor Capian, I have to give him major kudos. He's at the Department of Ed in Rhode Island now, and he's texting me pictures of napkins of, this is what we want to do. And he goes, all right, let's make it happen. And so we had full autonomy to really design what it was that we felt was best for kids. So for us, it was, how do we take Teach for America, AmeriCorps, Central City Year, and Central Falls and blend it all together? And that is how the idea came to be. So basically, we identified at the beginning that we had a number of huge gaps in the substitute teaching realm. But what we knew was that we couldn't, put lipstick on a pig, basically, and try doing the same thing over and over again. So we really turned it into a full-time fellowship. It's a clinical program for both certified and non-certified educators. And I'm proud, over the last 5 years, we've now placed 20 former fellows into full-time positions in the district. We've probably lost another 20 or so to neighboring districts because we're so small, so we cannibalize each other. But it's really become a transformative program in Central Falls. And I like to say it's an innovative twist on the traditional role of the substitute teacher.
Well, I love that. So you're thinking about it from the perspective of the schools and the HR. Marquise, you're thinking about, like, who's that going to be? Who are we talking about for real? And can we meet the challenge that Cheryl was talking about in sort of an organized way? Okay, maybe there's some unlikely characters out there who could be extraordinarily valuable in this equation. Maybe we haven't been thinking about this, right? I think possibly you have been thinking about this, right? So tell us about Coaching for Change and your observations that turned into action.
Yeah, so I'm relatively, everyone else here has been in the sub space and the pipeline space for a while, and I'm relatively new to the pipeline space for about 18, or let's call it 2 years. Coaching for Change started out as figuring out, how do we provide more supports to 4th through 9th graders to help them stay on track. And with teachers having so many kids in their classroom, guidance counselors having heavy caseloads, how do we bring additional support to kids? And our solution was, let's get college students to come in and serve as tutors, have them serve as role models and mentors in a variety of capacities, right? Whether it's after school, in school, or summer, how do we get kids connected? And so what we found, which was really interesting, was most principals loved our work because over 60% of our college students were college students of color. And in the districts that we're in urban districts where the staff is 90% white. The students are 60% students of color. So they're like, and we also need males, right? And so it's how do we get a pipeline of talent to be interested in education and just helping kids. And so our ability to go on college campuses to recruit college students who are non-ed majors, because right now, if you're talking to our college students who are on campus that are social justice warriors, they want to change the world, when you talk to them about education, they're like, I'm all set. That's not what I want to do. But when you talk to them about mentoring and being a role model and helping kids that are coming from the same background and have the same experiences as them, they're like, I'm willing to sign up for that, right? And so we're not explicitly saying become a sub or become a teacher or even work in the ecosystem of education. It just naturally happens, where in last year alone, 25 of our college students were hired as substitute teachers, and another 30 were hired as educators or full-time teachers, right? So it's they get the bug of wanting to help because of that experience. And what's really interesting is that everyone has had a school experience, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a good one. And so being able to flip school experience from being student to being an authority type figure that's being coached and supported and helping kids is a really powerful experience that's helping school districts build their talent pipeline on college campuses in with college students that weren't even thinking about it.
Jay and Marquise, I'm really interested in the challenge related to dual language learners and, substitute teachers. Like, are we getting people who can't really effectively communicate with our kids? Or, through Coaching for Change and through the approach that you've taken in Central Falls, Jay, are you finding people who actually can respond to those challenges so we don't have things that are half lost learning days for kids who are dual language learners?
Yeah, so in Central Falls, about 40% of our students are multilingual learners. And as I mentioned, we are a community where Spanish is the predominant language, Portuguese, Creole, French Creole, Haitian Creole are right after that. But for us, on any given year, so the first cohort that we selected 5 years ago had 15 fellows across 6 schools here in Central Falls, and they report Monday through Friday, bell to bell. That is their location. So they're not getting phone calls at 5 a.m. or text messages saying, okay, we need you here, we need you there. But for us, it was extremely important that we opened this opportunity up to the community. So somewhere between 20 and 30% of our total cohort every year are residents of Central Falls. They may be alumni. They are individuals who share lived experience with our students. And that's, to your point, John, it's essential that we are creating the conditions here, that we do bring in more educators of color, more educators from the community who can make that connection with our students at a different level, that maybe majority of our teachers cannot. Predominantly, we are a white monolingual speaking staff in Central Falls. But one area that we have seen some trouble here, and this gets back to the policy piece, is, again, we have amazing genius in the city of Central Falls. A lot of our TAs, a lot of our lunch aides are educators in their home country, and they speak 2-3 different languages, and they can jump in like in a second's notice, yet they come to, and this isn't just a Rhode Island thing, this is a national. They come in, and I had one who basically said she gave up and she just became a TA. And that's nothing against TAs, because they are essential to what happens in our schools. But from a policy, from a, whatever level we want to call it, we have the population. They're there. The system is what has created way too many barriers for us. On a positive note, we just actually in Central Falls, we just hired a fellow who from Puerto Rico, a biology major, so secondary, multilingual science. Check, check, check. You're hired. I was like ready to give my paycheck to them, basically. And this is someone who left her position as a TA, which is a union position, took a leap of faith, and we just got the emergency certification from the state of Rhode Island in biology. And now she's working towards her secondary special ed. That's the type of individual that we want. Now, that being said, it's still a challenge. we're still looking for more of those, the diversity in the fellows group. But I am proud to say that at least a quarter, 25% or so every year are connected to Central Falls in some way.
Awesome. Great. Let's go full Hollywood squares here and bring everybody into the conversation. I'm curious, and Emily, let's get teed up to get you involved and start to bring in some of the questions that we've got from the audience. I'm curious, Amanda and Jill and Jeremy, your reactions to what you're hearing from people who are on the front lines and trying to respond to the challenges. Amanda, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm so excited that everybody is hearing about the fellowship model that Jay worked on. I think it fits this moment so well. And I think it's also really nice to have a concrete example. If people are inspired by hearing what Marquise is working on and thinking about partnerships, we're starting to see more districts turning to their partners to think about this problem and think about how to get staffing. So feel free to reach out to us as an organization. Part of, I think, why we exist is helping people to put together those. What I will say is the gig economy model that we use right now is its only benefit is that it keeps costs low. So when you are, as a district or as a nonprofit partner, thinking about how might we partner to enrich the experiences our students have when their teachers aren't there, just know that money will be part of the conversation. That's something I can say as the not Marquise in this situation to just say, but I just think there's a tremendous opportunity here. So Marquise is really thinking about who are the people that we bring in. I think other organizations sometimes focus, and Marquise does this too, but sometimes focus on how do we bring in programming that we think would make a difference? And this is another way that we get people better trained, is by training them on some sort of techniques or some things that we want to enrich students' lives. And there's just a big range of possibilities. And I think it's an exciting area to see stuff start working. So
that's awesome. Emily, I'm going to come to you in just one second for some questions. Oh, you want me to come right now?
Well, Cheryl has her hand up. So.
Well, I wanted to turn to Cheryl and to Jeremy, who think about things at the state level, and just hear what Jay and Marquise's comments had triggered about possibilities for states at least creating the space for this kind of innovation, not dictating particular approaches, but seeing what flexibility can produce and how states might react. So Cheryl, go ahead.
Well, first I wanted to say a shout out to Amanda and Jill, that the work that I was doing in the district that I previously worked in was in connection with substantial classrooms. And so they're kind of innovative, and we were building and creating together and figuring out what makes sense within that community. And so just, I wanted to shout out to Amanda and Jill thank you for all of your work, because that has now impacted what happens at the state level. So we're looking at a statewide sub-campaign of getting started with that work. And what does that look like? What are our needs regionally? Our rural needs around substitute teachers are very different from our urban needs around substitute teachers, or our suburban needs around substitute teachers. What are our resources and what's available out there? So all of these pieces have kind of come into play.
I think you make a really important point, and I want to say for Amanda and Jill, they're not actually proposing a specific solution. They've issued an invitation for innovation and have really made the point. Jill, hold up your book right now, because I really recommend it to folks. But it is not only an invitation to innovation, but it is also an invitation to co-create with communities. So for those who are listening and thinking about their own community, it's not like, oh, let's go look on the internet and grab some solution and try to do it right here. Let's talk to people and figure out what our assets are, what our pain points are, and work together to come up with this, with some possible solutions, and also to embrace experimentation. Like this is complicated. It's multidimensional, and probably when you squeeze the balloon in one place, you can make it small in one place and it might get large in another place. So there's not like a magic thing here. There is experimentation and working our way in the direction of a better solution. So yeah, go ahead, Jill. Go ahead.
I just want to add too, I just want to remind, it's also profoundly human and complex, right? We have this really bad habit in education of wanting to make it mechanical and complicated but the truth is, like, if you throw a stone, you're pretty likely to hit a target. If you throw a live bird, it's not as likely to hit the thing you're aiming at. Like, these are living human beings with Yakima luggage racks of issues that they bring to bear every day, and feelings, and I can't say it enough. Like, we have to be so kind to ourselves and one another in this process for this to work. And so, and very much like being invited by the campaign is so to be expected, because that's exactly how the campaign is always like approached everything about reading, but education more broadly. We're only going to get there together. And if we just extend generosity at every turn.
Love that. Jeremy, what's your thought as you hear what Marquise is doing, what Jay is doing, what Cheryl's talking about? What's your thought about how states, what do you take back to states about how they might think about this?
No, I think there's a lot of states, and I think Cheryl's a great example of that, who are looking at this on what can they do. I think in a lot of states, the first question has got to be, what barriers does current state policy have to these kind of projects? And there are some state barriers, and they aren't intended. And it's like Jill's saying, they've maybe been there just too long, or we didn't think that this would be the impact when we had this kind of a problem dealing with humans. So I think there's a lot of state policies that need to be reviewed. We've seen states doing that and removing some of the barriers. I'm not so sure that states are the right vehicle to actually move this kind of change, because each district and each school is going to be different. I think Jay highlighted that, and so did Marquise. And so I think states removing barriers is the minimum. There are some examples where Cheryl's working on it with California, where states can make some of that impact. But I think there's probably a lot more we're going to see in some really innovative pilot projects that districts are doing or individual schools are doing, that then the question becomes, is that scalable at a state level? And if it is, how do we make that work?
Great. But I think you make a really important point that this is likely to push up from districts, then push down. And it would be wrong, actually, in a sense, for it to push down from states, except insofar as trying to remove caps and weird, unnecessary hurdles and barriers. Emily, to you.
So there is a related question from Candy Trujillo, and that is, what is considered highly effective and who creates this evaluation? And then also she adds on, how do you ensure equity in pay? How is that addressed? And how do you make sure that it's not just essentially, and you've all touched on this a little bit, essentially not just a warm body, but somebody who really wants to be there and really wants to be a teacher like the rest of the faculty.
Jeremy, let's start with you on this assessment question, and then ask others, maybe starting with Marquise, about how we get people who really bring something to this effort, not just stopgap.
Well, I think that the question's a good one. And the definition of what is highly effective or effective depends on where you are. In many states, either the state board or the state education agency has defined what are the metrics to get to that. Not everywhere, but like Michigan, the law that I cited is based on the Michigan rules that they have for highly effective teachers. When you look at other states like Arizona, what they said is districts must come up with an appropriate evaluation. And so it will change from district to district. But there usually is a defined definition. Whether you agree with that or not, we need to look at all of them and you can take a look. But there in most states are some kind of definition that's already there. And a lot of times it's definitions they're using for teachers, which they might be trying to review and see if that's fitting for what a substitute teacher would be. I do think it's important to Amanda and Jill's question, though, just how do we not water down what it takes to become a substitute teacher, but instead also try to guarantee that we have the highest quality teachers possible if we're trying to increase these.
Yeah, I mean, it just gets into all those questions about assessment, right? We don't want to over assess, but if we don't assess at all, then we're basically sending a signal that this doesn't matter, that actually we are just getting a warm body and, overseeing kids, but we're not really trying to accomplish anything here. Marquise and Jay, I'm curious how you think about it. Maybe we'll start with Jay. I mean, you've been very purposeful in trying to think about something much bigger than a warm body. And then Marquise, from your perspective, nobody wants to be a warm body. I mean, it would be nice to be a warm body, but that's not a good assignment for a job. So I'm coming to you in a second. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the trap that we fall into, because before it was, if you breathe or you blink, we're going to throw you into a classroom, and it's going to be a Band-Aid, and kids are going to have their heads down on the desks, and the teacher's going to be reading a newspaper, looking at it's just not going to be purposeful time. And I think for a lot of our kids, really for educators and kids, consistency, they thrive off of that, and they thrive off of relationships. So for us, listen, we've made a lot of mistakes in the last 5 years, and we are building the plane, flying it, and serving drinks simultaneously, basically, is what's happening here. But for us, I think one of the areas, or one of the ways that we try to mitigate to get the right person, let's just say, is the interview process. So in most places, sub might just fill out a form, and then they get a call the next day, and you're plopped into a building and no one knows you. In Central Falls, we go, every candidate goes through 3 levels of an interview process with me. The first is an informative. The second is a very guided, not a guided, it's a structured approach around 5 key questions that I ask every applicant, regardless of whether they have education background, where they're from, socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. Those questions, they may sound corny at the time that they're being asked, but afterwards, people are like, now I can kind of see where you were going with this, and really trying to get to the core of the individual. Now, the challenge is if you come from a school of education, at least you have an understanding of education to a degree. You've done practicum, you've done student teaching. Now, they may come in and go, whoa, I was in a suburban school, now I am in an urban school. What is trauma? What is social emotional learning? What is, culturally responsive pedagogy? That is just stuff over time. We're just not enough time for us to train them up, right away. Those who don't come from schools of ed, it is the system that they went through. It's the experience that they went through. So they're victims in many ways of a system that has gone against many people. So for them, they come in and they have no training whatsoever. And we have struggled with that. We're struggling with it this year, big time. But I think for us, on any given year, we typically lose maybe 2 individuals of the fellows group who just, mea culpa, this just isn't for me. And we respect that. For others, they use it as a year of self-exploration to really sit back and say, yep, this is what I want to do. I want to immerse myself in education. I want to go get a master's. I want to get a bachelor's degree. I want to go in to be a guidance counselor. I want to go into a reading specialist, whatever it may be. But for us, again, I've made many mistakes in the last 5 years, but that interview process is definitely one of the pieces that ensures we are hiring people with the right shared core values of the district.
So that's really interesting. Marquise, I'm interested to hear how you think about it from the other side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, our entire focus is around creating a mentoring structure, right? So our focus is knowing that our college students are novice. They're going into classrooms not having that experience, the pedagogy. And so we want to pair our college students up with an experienced professional, whether it's a guidance counselor, whether it's a teacher, whether it is a para. We want to make sure that they have that level of consistency and they're seeing the same person over a 15-week period. And we took the structure of the I do, we do, you do model that teachers do in classrooms consistently, and we brought that to our college students. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, the college student is watching the teacher. operate. The next 3 to 4 weeks, they're working in collaboration with the teacher. And then the teacher is sitting back watching them operate, whether that's in school, after school, or during summer programming, right? So that by the end of that 15 weeks, the principal, the teachers, everyone knows whether or not this person should move forward as a staff member in the building. And so that's how that talent pipeline is really built, with the understanding that our college students are novice, and it gives everyone in the building confidence in hiring that college student, rather than Coaching for Change saying, we have great college students, right? It's better when it's coming from internal, when it's coming in from internally.
Interesting. There are a couple of questions. Oh, Cheryl, go ahead.
John, just one other piece. I think that what Jay and Marquise have talked about, in my experience, we've also had an opportunity to open up professional development to our substitute teachers. Mind blowing, right? It's already in place. It's very simple, but it also, the message, the mission, the focus for all of our teachers. So those district-wide professional developments, making them available to substitute teachers, allowing them to learn and to grow along with the classroom teachers. All those folks are supporting our students. And so why not share that knowledge, share that information with them?
Yeah, if I can just build off of that, that is one of the biggest pieces for us in Central Falls, is that they're not just a 8 a.m. to 2:30 and then they leave. We not only pay them, our daily rate is $225 a day or $195 a day with individual healthcare. So majority of them don't take the $195, they take the higher pay. And we just bumped that up this year from $130. So thank you, ESSER funding, because it really is about recruiting and retaining talent. I mean, that's what we're doing. But for professional learning, we have gone from once a month having coffee seminars with them just to kind of say, how you doing, what's happening type of thing, to now any professional development in the district, they can attend, and we actually pay them supplementally to do that. So whether it's American Reading, Eureka Math, it's social emotional Trump, whatever it may be, it's not enough because still they need years worth of training sometimes, but it's something. The second piece that we entered into is in Central Falls, we developed a teacher induction program as well, because our data, we're now in the 4th year of that. Our data was showing at our middle school, and we only have one, our teacher retention was just horrible. You know, most people in our middle school is a 5, 6, 7, 8 school. So elementary or secondary, a lot of times that's where the opening was. But as soon as something opened up at the elementary level, they were gone. Something jumped up at the high school level, they were gone. So we developed induction to really provide, using the new teacher center model, up to 90 minutes a week of embedded coaching. And we have 2 half-time master educators release time from their teaching to do that. They actually hold weekly office hours for our teaching fellows, and they run forums where we bring in directors and experts, you know, from the district. Again, it's not nearly enough. However, what it hopefully does show is that you're not a fish just swimming in the ocean. You're known, and you know, you're valued, and we believe in your growth. And like clockwork, the first 3 weeks, I had more phone calls of people crying, threatening to quit. They're cracking. Everyone's cracking. Come February, vacation, like a light bulb, it will come on and they find their groove, and you begin to see the confidence and the courage really build up. The key is keeping them with us that long enough to say, it's going to get better. We're here to support you. And the culture that we've created in Central Falls, I mean, our teachers are amazing. The fact that, you know, when we first started the program, it was, what are you? You're a sub. You're not a what's a sub? What's a fellow? What's the difference type of thing? To now, teachers are going unsolicited. Hey, I'm right across the hall. Oh, you don't have the American Reading book? Come on, let's come talk. So that sense of collegiality and that kind of really organic professional learning community is without a doubt one of the things I am most proud about of what we've created in Central Falls.
Fantastic. Thanks. The poll just came up, so please fill out the poll. And Emily, we have a couple of questions. I know this is perfect. We've got a poll jumping up in the middle of our Hollywood Squares, technology, and we have questions about the role of technology and how technology can be helpful. Can you bring those to the fore, and then let's hear from people about that?
Sure, and I'll just say a quick, please do complete the poll. That's the way that we make sure we get your feedback on making sure that these our weekly GLR Learning Tuesdays are responding to what you want to learn about and what you like. So a great question, like a two-part question about technology. First is from Priya Alawat, and she is from the Education Innovation Collaborative. And her question is about what do you think about using technology and innovative software to make substitute teaching easier and more appealing to more people? And then from an anonymous attendee, we have the question about teleteaching. So I guess the idea is thinking about a substitute as a classroom manager who zooms in the classroom teacher. And have you seen that? So kind of like both two kind of angles around technology. So one is how can you just basically use technology to make substitute teaching easier and attract more people? And then what about using technology to basically address the teacher shortage?
Amanda, you want to start out on that?
Yeah, sure. I think this is really interesting. This is another thing that the pandemic really made clear is that teachers, there's multiple roles that are happening, right? And so you have the direct instruction stuff, a lot of that moved online in the pandemic. And then you also have this thing that like every parent in America knows, and that is that kids need to be in the classroom, and that in the classroom experience has something else. It's not just about the direct instruction. It is really about like, I'm part of a classroom community and people who care about me and all that stuff. I think for a long time, substitute teaching, one of the ways it gets overlooked is that we sort of undervalue that caregiving part or that classroom in-person experience. So I think we have a new appreciation for it, and that it takes skills and care to do it well. And we have this opportunity to think about, like, you could actually do that pairing. And I think you're starting to see this sometimes if you can't get a teacher to do like calculus in high school, maybe you're zooming into that with students from other high schools or something like that. You still need somebody in the room. And I just think it helps to shift up how we're thinking about those two roles, and helps to clarify some of the things that we should be looking for in that person who is in person, and preparing them and sort of like rewarding them, not necessarily monetarily, also that, but also rewarding, just honoring that they're good at it and that really matters. So I do think that splitting has potential to, again, shake up our thinking. So I think it's kind of exciting, right?
And I would just add, great ed tech facilitation is really, really hard, right? Like it's hard for, experienced veteran teachers. And so it doesn't, I think, I almost started to cry when both Jay and Cheryl were talking about the importance of PD for subs. So that doesn't alleviate the problem. It may be something we should be training folks on. And I also just think, every parent I know who had kids home with them all day came to realize that a huge part of Amanda's touched on this, but a huge part of being in schools is about socialization and having the energy to like care for how humans feel and experience the world and learn and grow. And that's I'm not sure tech does that fully. Yeah.
Listen, we have one other question, but I want to ask a question quickly first. Which is, and Cheryl, since you've had experiences at every level, let me ask you, let's say somebody is watching and is like energized and wants to figure out like what in the world is actually happening in my school district, in my community around substitutes. What's the strategy? How would somebody get started on inquiring? And Jay and Amanda, I'm curious, like if people want to learn more about what's going on wherever they happen to be sitting right now, just to understand what the strategy is, how would you go about that? What would you recommend to people?
It's an interesting question. I would tap into what's going on at the school that you're affiliated with. What's the experience there?
Mhm.
I had the luxury of working in human resources. So I was working with certificated employees. And so I had access to our substitute system and could pull our data. But you could ask for that information. You could ask for that data. How are we doing on our fill rates? That's a great HR question to ask. What does it look like? What are our schools that are hardest to fill? Who's doing very well, even in the midst of, the middle of this pandemic?
Yep.
What are our numbers looking like?
Yep.
Who did we hire last year? How many people did we hire from our sub pool? Those are basic questions that you could go to human resources and talk to them about, but you can also, again, look at the experience that subs are having at the site that you're affiliated with. What's working, what's not working, how do we support? You can start to kind of generate, what does your fill rate look like? How many days do you not have a sub? What do you do when you don't have a sub? Those conversations, I think, are the right questions to start asking. If that's something that you start with your data, know how big the problem is first.
Jay, I see you nodding. So add into that, and like, how do people do this without triggering like a defensive response? Because I could see the easy thing is, and so really just trying to elicit information.
Yeah, I think you got to start in the weeds and work yourself up. So I truly believe, let the practice dictate what the policy needs to be. And in Central Falls, that's exactly what we did. Look, our size is our greatest strength. It's also our biggest limitation because we wear 50 different hats. But we don't have these multi-levels of, again, bureaucracy and red tape that we have to jump through as a district. And that's why if we have an idea, and it's what's best for kids, and it's what's best for the community, and it's what's best for our educators, then we do it. I think for me, it's have open communication and just be honest. One of the things I'm starting to see this year, we had a college student. We went into a partnership with Johnson & Wales University and their MAT program to allow their students to be a fellow 4 days a week. And then on the 5th day, they do their clinical hours connected to their MAT program. So it's an innovative kind of offshoot of the fellows. And we had this, she's awesome. She's just really good, but she doesn't have an undergrad in education. She got placed in a position of a self-contained classroom at our elementary level with a bunch of high flyers. She has no experience in this whatsoever. And there was a lot of stress and anxiety. And even at one point, she was afraid to speak up. And I think that that's something, fellows, I say, text, call, carrier pigeon, smoke signal, I don't care what it takes. The first person you have to go to is your school principal. They are the ones who have the best pulse of that entire building, much better than me sitting in the basement of central office. But just brainstorm, talk about it. They want to come up with a solution at the same way. But what I tell them is, if you just need a shoulder to cry on, you need someone to talk to, you need someone at 8 p.m. at night or 6:30 in the morning, and you're just high anxiety, call me and we'll just sit and we'll talk to each other. And it's that support that I'll tell you, districts don't have with their substitute teachers, quote unquote fellows. So to have someone at central office, and major kudos to Dr. Stephanie Downey Toledo, who is our superintendent, who's all in on this initiative. She's like, whatever you need to build this out, you just tell me and we'll make it happen. So for me, it's communicate, but have those hard conversations as well and be humble. I can't tell you how many fellows come in, whether they come from a CERT program or not, they think they have all the answers to everything. And I'm like, you have no idea the wall you're about ready to smack into. So be humble, understand you're going to get knocked down. You're going to have really, really, really bad days, but then you're back there at 7:30 the next morning. You're talking with colleagues. You've got your arm around a student. You're talking about things that happened the day before. That again is at the core of what we do and why we do it.
Well, folks, I mean, I could go on for a long time, and I know people are really interested, but we're out of time. And I just want to thank everybody who has participated in this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I feel really energized about the opportunities. And now I feel badly about my own experiences with substitute teachers. So Amanda and Jill, thanks so much for raising this question. Jay and Cheryl and Marquise, thank you for all you're doing and for helping to share those ideas. And Jeremy, as always, is one of the great friends of the campaign. Thanks so much for I just love the way that you bring context to this and also use this as learning opportunities for yourself. And I feel like stuff goes through these meetings and out into the world through you in just such a wonderful way. So your partnership is so important to the campaign, and huge appreciation to you for that.
And thanks as always to our colleague and moderator, John Gompertz. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you who joined in for this special rebroadcast conversation. I hope you found it as informative and inspiring as I did and are leaving with new ideas for strategies to address the teacher staffing shortage. And I hope you'll join us again next Tuesday at 3 p.m. for Advancing Digital Equity to Support Equitable Learning Recovery, featuring Jean-Claude Brizard of Digital Equity and others. And stay tuned for more informative and engaging sessions throughout the new year. Thank you all again. Have a great rest of your day and Happy New Year.